Welcome to A Writer's War, a National Lottery Heritage Fund First World War Centenary project, produced by Chrome Radio for the University of Oxford's Faculty of Medieval and Modern Languages, in partnership with Year 10 students from Oxford Spires Academy. The university organised a series of workshops for the students, looking at responses of British, French and German writers to the First World War. This is the third of 4 podcasts in which we hear from the students. All quiet on the Western Front.
I'm Phoenix Denno and we're at Oxford Spires Academy. We've been doing a workshop looking at poems written during World War I. Some of them were written by English poets, some by German, and I didn't look at the French ones, but they were there too. I think it's interesting to hear poems from the different countries. They're the side of the story you don't really hear, because in England you tend to hear the English poems and not the German poems. There wasn't a huge difference between them. For both English and German, we looked at 2 separate poems and bits of writing, and in both the different languages there was a contrast between the 2 poems, one of which was a lot more glorious view of it. It made it seem like it was all good, and then the other one was written by someone who'd experienced it and didn't find it was quite as good. So both of them were actually quite similar in that way. They both had those contrasts. I found the German poems very difficult to translate, because a lot of it is language you don't hear. Spoken language and written language tend to be very different. So what we learn in German lessons and what we were reading was very different. We wrote poems based on more modern warfare, stuff that would happen now. Mine was quite simple. If we were to war, we'd see that it is really not worth the trouble. Drones don't sound so good to me, nor being buried under rubble. Fires that ravish the land and blistering bioweapons. To do this to man by hand, there must be something wrong with us. I think something to do is to spread awareness of the different sides of the war and how people who were in universities and colleges at the time would have had to go off and fight and probably would have never come back.
I'm Molly Ahmad and we're at Oxford Spires Academy. We've been analysing poetry, war poets specifically, and in different languages as well. I did German, other people did French. We were looking at the First World War and different representations of the First World War, people who hadn't been to war, people who had been to war, and what their expectations and realities were. I rather liked Wilfred Owen because of his use of onomatopoeia, his plosive sounds, the way he represents war using similes, metaphors. And in German, we were looking at a passage from All Quiet on the Western Front by Remarque about going to war and seeing the horrific side of war and about people who are forcing people to go and the pressure. If you didn't go, you were called a coward. I think our perception of war will change because we've looked at poets who have experienced war, and it will probably change a lot of people's opinions about war and what it was like and what happened. My parents are from Germany, Ireland and Pakistan. Obviously, Germany was associated with the First World War and the Second World War. And then Pakistan, you have a lot of conflicts about the border and the separation from India and Pakistan. My grandpa had to flee the country just after the partition. And a lot of my family also left that part of the country just before the partition to be able to escape it. Unfortunately, not many people were as lucky. I know that my great-grandmother had to flee Germany with her husband because she was a Jewish German and come to England as an immigrant. She was also pregnant at the time. She had to leave her sisters and her family because they didn't believe that a war was going to happen, but she knew that there could be a war and she wanted to escape it. She was a dentist in Germany and she wasn't allowed to do what she loved, and neither was her husband because they were both Jewish. So it is very emotional to look at the different poets and see what my family could have experienced. And I know that some of my family did die in the war, and I don't think there are many letters back from them. I know that people did fight in the Second World War as well as the First World War from my family. And from the Second World War, we don't have much either. This is my poem that I wrote after we looked at onomatopoeia of modern war. It talks about the disaster of explosions and how when you're dead, you are with your friends once more, like when you hang out with your friends at home and you're finally at peace. Destruction from a single sound, silence of an explosion, stamps from feet and drums in remembrance of an explosion, towns painted with the fallen blood that drips in quietly, friends together once more.
I'm Sophia. I found the workshops very interesting. You got to learn a bit more about the war poetry and how people thought in the war. What was most interesting to me about the whole experience was the fact that people who weren't in the war writ all these nice poems and people who weren't writ the reality of it.
I'm Erica. I found these workshops really interesting. I feel like I know a lot more about the reality of the war through these poems because they were first-hand experience. I think it's really important to talk about what these soldiers went through in the war because it was so horrible. Wilfred Owen wrote a poem about the gas attacks. He really described them in detail, and I thought that was very harrowing.
And it wasn't just happening in England. When we looked at the German poem, it was the same. The German people who had gone to war, they were also saying how disturbing it had been. We wrote this poem. We decided to work together because we thought we could create ideas better. The crashing of the corrupted aircraft, stealing lives from civilians, the scorched skin from the frightening flames, burnt like blackened toast.
The curled-up cat in my cosy home, meowing at me for a meal.
We haven't finished it, it's mostly there.
You have been listening to A Writer's War. I do hope you'll join us for the next podcast in the series.